Welcome, everybody. I'm Kevin Guthrie, and I'm with Xiao-Li Meng, the University Professor of Statistics at Harvard University. I will dispense with the long introduction of all the many things that Xiao-Li does, except to say that he is the founder, chief editor of the Harvard Data Science Review, which is a journal focused on data science. Our conversation today is all data science all the time, and what an amazing, challenging time for that. Xiao-Li and I had the pleasure of talking with Xiao-Li at an event that we had at our organization called Ithaca, our Next Wave conference in December. And there we talked about data science and its impact on the academy, particularly things like the challenge of recruiting faculty in an environment where commercial firms need data scientists, the challenges with getting data in for research at colleges and universities, very focused on, how the academy was being impacted. And that was December. And so that was pre-COVID and basically pre all of the world that we're dealing with now. So, we're gonna talk more about the impact of data science in more of the popular world today. So Xiao-Li, welcome. Thank you for being here. One of the things I just wanted to start with is, working on the HDSR, one of the things you talk about is data as an ecosystem, and the fact that data science is not really a discipline, but in fact is a combination of many disciplines. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means for how data science is conducted and the work that's done, using data to inform policy and things that we're seeing in the world today.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. It's good to see you again. And I would say that, as we all know, that when we met last time, it was before BC, right? That's called a BC, and we're all waiting for what they call AD, after disease. And so thank you for that wonderful question. Yes, I wrote my first editorial in the Harvard Data Science Review, talking about data science as an ecosystem. And I say that basically for two reasons. And one is everybody knows that the notion of ecosystem is that whatever the components, whatever the sub-community in it usually gets affected. Which now we're just getting together, do things that the evolution of the ecosystem will affect every one of us. And I am trained as a statistician, and I can testify the entire statistical field itself has evolved so much because of the data science, because of the big data, the way we do research, the education program, the way we outreach, it impacts my own research. I can give you a very simple examples. Statisticians, we tend to study, how do you take a sample to learn about the population? For example, predicting the 2020 election, right? You take a polls, you do all those things. That's kind of a traditional statistics. But the new era with all the big data, everything else, we have a lot more emphasis on things like, personalized medicine, right? Precision medicine. And that's really turned the statistics upside down, because it's about collecting a bunch of people, collecting a population to approximate an individual. It's entirely a different way of thinking about those things. So you can see that's just the one example of how the research itself gets impacted by this evolution of the data science. The other big reason I call it ecosystem is just because a lot of things we face in data science. And most people think about data science to be thinking about statisticians, computer scientists, machine learners, maybe applied mathematicians, but you're still thinking about like STEM field, thinking about kind of a quantitative, mathematically oriented people working on data science. But my point here is a lot of problem we face now is really takes the whole society to deal with it. A very simple example, COVID-19, contact tracing. And we have heard, some countries do well, other countries do not as well. And all these issues that if you think about the contact tracing is not just a technology issue. It's not just a data science issue in the traditional sense, because there's a trade-off here, right? Their countries do very well because they keep track of individuals' movement, where they go, their names, who they contact. there are a lot of things like from the perspective tracing contact that seems like, great. But on the other hand, there's a lot of issue of the privacy invasion. There are a lot of other, ethics issues. And so where do we draw a line? And these are the issues that are not necessarily, actually, I would say it's not the kind of question the statisticians or computer scientists or machine learners should be the one to answer. It's not a question for any single discipline to answer. It's a really take as a whole society to figure out where we want to be in terms of the trade-off between data utility and data privacy, all these issues. I have to plug into saying the Harvard Data Science Review published a special issues on COVID-19. There's one article is done by David Leslie. It's about these, ethical guidelines for doing AIs for data science, for COVID-19 tracing. So that's kind of example where you will see that why I consider this whole data science, it's not a single discipline, but it requires a collection of us to work together.
Yeah, so when we think about that and the challenges associated with that, and obviously one aspect of that is the humanities or other fields, both those fields and that way of thinking, the philosophical thinking being important to interpreting some of these outcomes. What do you feel like is the kind of training that faculty and students in the humanities have to have about data science? I mean, what do they need to know to be able to be effective in asking questions around AI and those types of things? What are the universities needing to do in terms of preparing the humanities fields in terms of data?
It's absolutely great question. I think that being this editor for Harvard Data Science Review, I've been in close contact with humanists, philosophers, social scientists, a lot of people. And I think that what I generally see is that these fields, they really have a lot to contribute, right? Usually you need the philosophers when you have the true dilemmas you cannot solve. You need to think very hard about how to make these trade-offs. But on the other hand, I think that people have these expertise, the humanists, the philosophers, others, that they will have a stronger voice, stronger impact, that when they, for example, talk to the people from STEM fields, if they can also understand the kind of language we use, right? When we talk about the variance, we talk about bias, we talk about p-value, it's very much like when we talk to philosophers, we can understand their basic language, because there's a great communication issues. But fundamentally, I think we just need to, for the whole society, and I think it's not just the university, I've been really emphasizing we should start from kindergarten. And again, I want to plug in the most recent issue of Harvard Data Science Review, we have an article by the president of American Statistical Association talking about data science start from kindergarten, right? The idea is that you need to have people from very early on understand this notion of reasoning and uncertainty, probabilistic thinking. Probabilistic thinking is not a 1 + 1 = 2. Probabilistic thinking is something plus something equal to something else, that each has more than one choices, right? And so I think a lot of things I see that when I communicate with people from other fields, they have a little bit of fear. They feel like, oh, I'm not mathematically oriented. I'm not able to think like you guys. I think no, that's actually really the problem of a language. I think we need that kind of training that a lot of humanists, they're actually thinking in a very nuanced way, right? There's a lot of scenario you need to play out. And the issue of thinking about probabilistically is how do you attach numerical values to each one of them? How do you think about their risk, different risks, right? So there's a kind of quantitative aspect. But the general notion is absolutely the same. It's about dealing with all these different variations. And data science essentially help you to think about these variations by attaching that what variation has more possibility than others in a kind of more nuanced way. So I think fundamentally one is to have the understanding of reasoning and uncertainty. The others to build this kind of a language that we can communicate with each other much more effectively.
So, there you're talking about populations with, lots of education and advanced degrees and all of that. We're living in a world where data sciences or data, at least data informed decisions, and sometimes data used in maybe irresponsible ways are being used to make points. As you look back on the COVID process, like the time. So, in the very, very early days, we thought 60,000 cases was a lot in, in China when we heard about that. We're obviously well beyond that. And during a certain period of time, we were only measuring symptomatic testing, symptomatic cases, et cetera. When you look back on that in terms of the way statistics and data were used to inform policy and to inform the way people interpreted what was happening with the disease, do you see any big mistakes that jump out at you, or things that maybe could have been handled differently to help manage the from a policy level what was going on? I mean, were there things that statistically you thought, well, they should have done that differently?
Thank you for that great question. And I think that what this whole COVID-19 revealed is really a really big problem for the data science community itself. And I think that there are really two big problems. One is the data quality issue. And I think, there's no blame here. When everybody is trying to deal with this unprecedented situation, trying to collect whatever you can, save as many lives as you can, there's not really anyone will have the time, all the resources needed to sort of collect the data, very carefully. So that's completely understandable. Everybody trying to use whatever the data is available to make decisions, do all those things. So that's completely understandable. But it does say that we actually lack a fundamental infrastructure to be able to collect the data in this fast, in this kind of situation, and collect them reliably. That leads to the second problem, which is a broader one, which is really that very much like the sort of the medical community. The medical community, when there's emergency, there's ERs, there's all kinds of protocols that people have training to deal with these issues. But in the data science, community, that we don't really have this kind of at least not, I'm aware of that, this notion of like a rapid response team, right? In terms of when we have all these problems. And that's really not a term that I invented. Erica Klacek from Boston University, I think he's the head of the data science there. He wrote recently an article about the data science itself needs a kind of rapid, response team. I mean, the whole idea here is really about how do you take whatever is available and to do the kind of analysis in a very principled way. I mean, this is what I've been teaching my students. I'm trying to teach a notion I call the principled corner cutting. Because we all call corners, especially when we have so many things going on, which need to make a quick decision. But knowing what corners that I can cut first, in what order to cut these corners are very important. I think anyone in industry, in government, they understand when they need to make a decision on a very fast pace. You would have that kind of a sophistication to know which part of information probably is most important, which ones probably, if it's rough, it's okay, and what decisions is affected more by data, others probably less so. There are a lot of experience, a lot of that kind of trainings that I think we need to do a lot more of that. And so for me, the biggest problem is the data quality, and which we keep seeing how people revise all those things just because that we just have a very biased sample to start with.
Yeah, and so and a lot of that, when you keep talking about timing, pace, speed. So I guess one of the challenges really is being positioned to be able to do things quickly, having the infrastructure in place, right? I mean, because so many decisions are having to be made so rapidly, and the normal scientific process is, as you say, you've got to figure out the trade-offs. So when I think about one super important area of data science, if we wouldn't have thought about it in the past, I don't think, just as a layperson, is the election that's coming up. And I've never in my lifetime been asked to or been put in the position of thinking about questioning the results of the election, as if we couldn't count the ballots, et cetera. And it sounds like when we get to that point, there's going to be enough uncertainty that perhaps data science is going to be useful, or at least understanding of data science is going to be necessary. What do you, as you look to the election coming up in November in the United States, what role can or will data science play if we have, controversy around the contested election or anything like that? What are your thoughts, advice, concerns about as we look forward to the election in November?
Well, to say there will be uncertainty is really an understatement. And I think one of the biggest roles data science can play and should play is to help to anticipate the uncertainty, to assess the uncertainty. Now, people say the uncertainty seems like just kind of a rhetorical, everything is uncertain, particularly during this COVID-19. But statistically, we have ways to measure them. And the unfortunate part, this is, I think, everybody, at least in the United States, understand what happened during 2016. You had so many polls that predict, Clinton was going to win, and in the end, that was a big surprise. And what happened was that I think this is squarely a kind of statistical question, and I really like to convey to people that we really have to understand better. I wrote an article about a couple of years ago, is that all these margin of errors that you see reported in the media, right? Media always report these surveys with margin errors 3% to 5%, that kind of errors. They are really talking about the kind of a sampling error, right? I mean, some are a little bit more sophisticated than others, but mostly they're thinking about these errors will go away. That if I just keep adding more people, if they have getting more and more answers, they will go away. And unfortunately, what these methods all missed is that when these surveys are biased, when there are systematic error and there are strong evidence that during 2016 there's systematic error, one of them is simply people refuse to give you their answer, right? It's not like they're lying. They just say, I don't feel comfortable giving an answer, or I have not made up my mind. So I just basically say, I don't respond. So the problem is that all surveys and all good survey posters know this is always a gigantic problem called non-response bias. When people don't respond, they don't respond for a reason. If they don't respond just randomly, it's just to reduce the sample size. You just increase the sample error. We know how to deal with that. All these margin errors will kind of correct that. You get these, plus minus 3% or 5%. But when the samples are biased, which means that whatever you get, the answer you get is actually, that these people are more likely going to vote for one side. If you don't know it, it's very simple, right? You could think about that the answer you're going to get is going to be not only going to be biased. The worst part is because you see when you have this bias across the entire country, like most polls like 2016 biased, you will be under the impression like I had so much data, therefore it got to be right. Right? And that's the kind of what I call the big data paradox, because essentially you have so much data to convince yourself, but you actually convince yourself in the wrong position because you have no chance to get out. You say, well, if so many polls tells me that if Clinton is going to win, what's the chance, that's not going to happen. But once you understand that from data science perspective, we know that there are two kinds of error. There are these sampling errors, what we call the random error, and there are the systematic error. Systematic error is much, much harder to deal with. But once they happened, the fundamental lesson people need to understand is increasing data science will eliminate the random noises, but they will only confirm the systematic error. The systematic error will be much, much stronger than the random error. Because in fact, when you have lots of data, the random error all gets killed. What's left is pretty much all systematic errors. Then if you treat them as random error, that's what all the big surprise comes. So, this is just one of the very simple example that why a little bit of understanding of how this uncertain error works, that it will fundamentally, it may not be changing your belief, but it will change your confidence. You should look at these results and say, I shouldn't be this confident, right? How much is the systematic error is there? I should have, trying to study some of those things. I'm seeing all the results now, which, obviously everybody has their own opinions about, depends on who you are. But I just need to caution people that, just don't forget that 2016 did happen, and that these data qualities that I certainly hope that pollsters, we have been doing a great job, that these are much more accurate, much less bias in the current poll. But nevertheless, as a data scientist, I just have to caution everyone that whatever these poll results, you have to ask how much is that kind of systematic bias that people this non-response bias.
Well, we'll come back to the election if we have time. The question of the difference between polls and the actual election results is one thing, and in our country we we want to see the result on, Tuesday night. So you have all these projections, right, of what the votes look like they're going to yield in terms of outcomes. And, I think one of the challenges is if the projections end up not being accurate based on the data that they have. So maybe we can come back to that if we have time. We do have the Q&A on the side of the, people at the session. You can ask questions, and I'm gonna offer up one of the questions just so that we don't miss any questions that people have. The first question is one about the academy. It's noting that the AI and machine learning will soon be taking over data analytics. How do you, Xiao-Li, suggest that the study of data science evolve to remain relevant in preparing students for careers using data and creating data ecosystems? What do the students have to learn?
It's a great question. I first want to say, let's correct that premises that AI and the machine learning is going to take over. The example I just gave in terms of 2016 election poll is a great example why we always need the humans. If you feed all the data to the AI, to the machine, it will not know that people lied or people did not respond for one direction or the other, unless you feed those informations. This takes a lot of studies about people's behavior, how they respond, the way they think about. There are a lot of things. So there are kind of mechanical part of AI or machine learning that can be automated, but there are a lot of other things that it's not impossible to automate. It should not be automated, and it cannot be automated. So I think what we trying to training our students these days is really train them more broadly. I think one most important thing is to understand there's increasing emphasis on understand that what they call this whole notion of algorithm fairness, transparency, don't be fooled by these black box. So there's actually a lot more to learn than previously, because you do have, yes, there are certain areas that things are just feed to the machine. And for example, deep learning is something everybody talk about, and the very people really have deep understanding. And I'm basically, kind of cliche to say, if we do deep learning without deep understanding, we will get ourselves in deep trouble. I mean, that's just the way it is. So I think there's a lot more to be learned. But the one thing we need to emphasize is to train our students is they need to think really more broadly. So for us, for the data science, Harvard Data Science Review, we have sections particularly on what we call stepping stones. It's about data science education. And the education is not just about learning a machine learning algorithm or learning a statistical method or do hypothesis testing. There's a lot of things about thinking about how the data were collected, who are collecting it, what questions being asked, how to interpret these results, how do you communicate with business leaders and government officials in order to have impact. And so all those things, I think that's just a much more, in a way, it's like a liberal arts education itself. It's much more broad education than just thinking about algorithm numbers.
So you're talking about, the kind of data you need in order to interpret effectively, which raises one of the, the huge questions that we're facing, which is this trade-off between the usefulness of the data, the completeness of the data, and personal privacy. We're obviously seeing that in many cases and forms, with our social media platforms and whatnot. What's your position about? I mean, talk to us a little bit about this trade-off between utility and privacy, and where you think that's going to go and where that's going to end up as having more and more data about us both gives us new opportunities and creates new challenges.
I think the opportunity and the challenges are absolutely the right word. And thanks for that great question, because this year, not only because of COVID-19 itself generated lots of questions about data privacy, as I already talked about, contact, tracing is one of these areas. The U.S. Census Bureau has already announced they're going to produce the new census data with this technology called the differential privacy. In a layperson term, essentially just saying before the data be released, they will inject noises to it, inject noise in a controlled way. And so to answer your question, Kevin, I think the biggest problem of this data privacy and data utility, it is not a solvable problem ever in the following sense, right? Because think about each of us. We all like to have information. We all like to data because that give us, give information, can help us to make decisions. We like to have information from other people. Most of us don't like other people to collect data on us. Most people don't like that, my life now become a statistics, like what do I do, what I eat, like, that everybody say, oh, no, go ahead to collect other people's data, but don't collect my data, right? The real problem is other people are us. So there's just no way to around this. And so I basically, I was giving a talk, I say, this notion data privacy, if you look at the term, it's a contradictory term, right? Data are born to reveal. Privacy means we have to conceal. So that's the two things there. It's going to fundamentally create this tension. So what we do, and go back to this notion of data science ecosystem, is we need to figure out where is the right trade-off. Now, this methodology called differential privacy is simply saying you can inject the noise to the data such that if you take out the one person away, the answer, well, let's say you take an average of the people. If you have this person in it, without in it, that statistically you cannot really tell much difference. There's a thing called epsilon control that statistically, this difference. And so this epsilon is called what they call the privacy loss budget. And it's a very intuitive notion. And the idea is that, if the epsilon is too large, you basically lost, the epsilon is too large, you basically have a great protection, but the data become useless. And if the epsilon is too small, you basically have great protection. In fact, the best protection is not to release data at all. But nobody is suggesting all these extreme terms. Now, computer scientist, my colleague Cynthia Dork, is a leading force in creating this technology, this method called differential privacy. I myself now got into doing a little bit of research there as well. Lots of computer scientists, statisticians all work on this area. But I wrote an editorial not too long ago for Data Science Review. Again, I was reminding everyone, let's don't forget that the fundamental question in this area is not the one that can be answered by computer scientists or statisticians or any single discipline, which is what value of epsilon shall we choose? Like for Census Bureau, where should they choose the balance? How much privacy to protect and how much data utility they should preserve? And that becomes a gigantic question because there's not a one size fits all, right? We already have articles in the Harvard Data Science Review. You will see social scientists, they want the data have a lot more utility. So some of them may be pushing, say, you should be more relaxing in terms of the privacy control. But then you others who really worry about, the privacy invasion, the government control, they want to push the other end. And the really difficult challenge is think about the Census Bureau. I always think about they're doing a heroic work because they are the one told by Constitution mandate to create data as accurately as possible. They're also required by law. Title 13 said you should protect everybody's privacy, and you just can't have both. And that just mathematically, computer scientists prove this theorem. You just cannot have both. Now the question then is, how do you make this choice? And that's a question really for the entire society, for philosophers, social scientists, humanists, policymakers all together. So again, this is just a gigantic ecosystem question.
We didn't talk about this before. I want to just ask a question about privacy in a slightly different way. So there's the issue of my personal privacy. I bought this, I did that, and Facebook can come back and put an advertisement in front of me and they see my personal data. So that's one kind of privacy that people may or may not want to protect, for their commercial purposes. And we hear that the younger generation really isn't concerned about that. They're fine with that. But in an age where really sophisticated use of tools, sort of replicating whether you call it disinformation or propaganda or where you see that these social media platforms in almost a kind of swarming way can influence large numbers of people's behavior because they see who they run with, what their thoughts are, et cetera. So is that a phenomenon that's explainable by data science and statistics in some way? That you can point to? What's going on there where there's this sort of ability to influence massive numbers of people through that kind of disinformation?
Yeah, I think that's another really a new emergent. Now it's getting more phenomena because of the technology, because of our ability to collect a lot of data, our ability to disseminate information so quickly, that social media, this whole notion that, previously we do know that if people manipulate informations, do those things and try to mislead others, but they tend to do on a smaller scale, or at least not fast, not this massive scale. But now with all this technology available, this is nothing new, right? In anything in the history that anything become powerful, it could also become dangerous, right? And this is just but it is a new phenomenon. So there are lots of new development in data science itself is trying to even detect the flaw, right? For example, now you can pretty much create a video. Somebody can create a video like me, give answers which I did not give, but they can just using, for example, this video you and I, they can create. And the question then is, how do we can detect quickly that was not a real video, that I was giving a terrible answer, right? And so you see that there is these issues that where the data science itself become a force, because the people who have these want to mislead people, they are using the data science technology as well, right? And then the other side, we need to sort of counterbalance that. So that's going to be a really big problem. But I think that the other one is two things to guard against this kind of being misled, right? One is general education, right? General education from kindergarten to understand that don't take whatever data people tell you just on their face value, right? Ask the question, who is broadcasting that message, right? How the data were collected, right? By the time you ask enough question, it itself naturally generates some skepticism, right? I mean, that's kind of the public defense against these kind of misleading information. The other is really that we need to have the kind of this what we call data ethics, these all these principles, all these social media. You should have certain form of make sure that detect these misinformations and they're trying to stop them. I know it's extraordinarily complicated situations, because you don't want to accidentally stop the right information, and how to distinguish all those things. I know but again, I think it just fits back to what I started when we start talking about. That is really a big societal question, and there'll be always some misinformation out there, and the question, how do you control that and not let those things take over?
Yeah, I once gave a talk on the deepfakes, the idea of deepfakes, and one of the things that is happening is things are moving so fast, and how do we educate people and how do we get them prepared? But eventually, I hope we'll find a new equilibrium, and people will be a little bit more sophisticated about that. I mean, the old days in the 19th century, people would fool people by literally pasting together photographs and making it look like people were in the same place. And now we would look at such a photograph and laugh at it, because it's obviously no way it could possibly be real. Right. But people in that time thought all those people were in the same room, even though the picture was clearly, a cut and paste job. So hopefully we'll get to that point sooner rather than later, but requires a lot of education. A lot of our audience is companies, small companies, entrepreneurs. One of the questions comes from someone at a small organization with a limited staff and a limited budget. And they're sort of asking, what are some of the ways that we can implement data science for decision making, in our small context? And how do we get our staff to understand the processes that are needed for effectively using data science to make decisions?
Well, I'm so glad that that question was asked, because that gave me another chance to advertise Harvard Data Science Review. In the last issue, we published an article, and I strongly encourage all the business leaders to to take a look at this article. It's exactly about the strategy implement AI and the data analytics in company. Now, I have been in academia for all these years. I get to know these people, these authors, and talk about these issues just because of I'm editing this journal. But I have to say that I learned quite a bit. There was a really important message there, and I think that this may or may not know to everybody that these forums. This is actually written by this two people. They are actually really like consultants to helping the company. They basically strongly suggest that the companies should have this what they call the AI strategists. The idea is that a lot of company hire data science people, and they hire more quantity people like myself, right? And we're probably pretty good in analyzing data, so on and so forth, but we're not that great to communicate with the leadership in these companies to transfer these findings into something actionable. So what they are suggesting is the company having these people essentially is like a translator, right? They understand the data scientist language, they understand the business need, but they can effectively, communicate and translate both sides. And Harvard Data Science Review also has a column specifically for industry leaders, and it's called Active Industry Leader, Active Industry Learning. And I think it was 2 issues ago we had an article by a column editor talking about exactly this, how the data scientist and the business leader in company, they should communicate with each other, and how they should revise their metric. That's another thing I learned. So sometimes they're not communicating. Both sides has different metrics in terms of evaluating what is being successful. And so I think that there are a lot of things, like we have probably half dozens of articles about exactly all these issues about what you should do in this industry setting.
So one of the things that we've talked about or inferred a little bit is just the scientific method, right? There's a theory, there's a hypothesis, you test it with evidence, you subject it to careful scrutiny. More and more we're seeing out in the world, there is not time for that, or people don't want to take the time for that. And we've got a lot of situations where people have a story they want to tell, and so they go find the data to support it, as opposed to they have data and they want to see what story the data tell, right?
Right.
So if you see something in an area that you're thinking about or you're concerned about, and you look at it and you're skeptical of the result, what's the first thing you look for? What's the first thing that what do you go and sort of check on to see, hey, are these people doing this the right way? What are the things that you would look for to ask questions about a result that you're skeptical about?
I do that all the time. That's my professional hazard. And I would say very simple. The first thing you always should look for is, where did the data come from? How did the data end up used for this study? Did these people collect themselves? And why did they collect the data? Where did they get this thing? So usually by asking that question, you will have probably quite a bit of your skepticism answered. And it's quite particularly when the article goes very fast to say something like a study shows, like just go on this thing, like you would ask like which study. And then if you really have time, and you probably should if you really care about, you go back to read a lot of articles, you will find that. And often when people quote the articles, they only quote the most kind of juicy part, most glorious part. Like the article might be very careful saying this should not be applied to this should be taken for granted salt. All those things usually gets ignored. And so, I think the phenomena you mentioned is essentially, as we all know, that's a cherry picking, and the cherry picking happens all the time. And that's probably, I would say, I think during our last conversation, you asked me what thing makes me worry most. And I answered the more most is selection, right? And that selection is just cherry picking. Because you can select the data, select the story, selecting methods even. There are people who say, okay, this data actually didn't really work. Let me change my method, right? You keep changing it. And as we talked about last time, as well as we statisticians will tell people that if you torture data enough, the data will confess, right? And that's what happened. So,
Well, if we could wave a magic wand, and every student in America we're going to be well versed in sort of the very basics of data science skills, so that when they read something as an adult getting ready for the election or trying to figure out if they're at risk with COVID or whatever, just to have a basic understanding, what would you hope that every person in America could understand about data or data science?
I would say I not only hope everyone in America, but everyone in the world I would say that I would love, and I'm actually working on it with another colleague, that we like to have these educations from kindergarten. The students should learn this notion called histogram. Now, many of you heard about histogram, essentially just a picture, right? Showing how the things are distributed. I think that if everybody understands that almost anything in life comes with not a number, not even two numbers, but comes with a picture of a distribution. Essentially, there's all these variations, there's all these different uncertainties, and actually, it's very easy to teach kids histogram. I actually call them a histogram because it's a picture. It's not a number. You know, they can draw the lines and how many people today take this breakfast, how many take other kind of breakfast. You teach the students think from day one, think of things with a variation in mind. Not if there's a fixed number, because what got ourselves into trouble in education is we teach a student way too long, everything has a unique answer. 1 + 1 is equal to 2. There's all these unique answers. Then only after 10 years or so, then we tell them, sorry, the world is much more complicated. Now you have to deal with all kinds of uncertainties. And I think that actually is really not a very effective way of educating students to think about to understand uncertainty. So I think what I would love to see is that whoever reads a newspaper, they say, okay, don't give me one number. Tell me the range. Like, I know you don't have one number. This is probably your best guess, but your best guess is probably still really with lots of uncertainty. I can almost pick up any article. I would ask the question. The person who created the numbers, they knew exactly what I'm asking because they know how many things they've done to create that one number. But they are not really that sure, themselves. I actually talked to my colleagues that one way to make sure that we have the confidence is very simple. You ask yourself this question, which I call the selfish test, right? If you tell others, say, okay, this vaccine works, okay, great. Well, would you use it yourself? Okay, so it's a very simple question. It's that if you say this thing, yeah, this is great, you should go for it. Well, would you invest, right? If you tell yourself, I'm actually not quite sure, then you don't have the right confidence. That's because it's not a unique answer there. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate Ivy, and I'm sure our audience does, you sharing your knowledge with us. We're right at the end of the time. The corollary I have to what you just said is something I learned in the 7th grade or something, which is that everything is on a continuum. Everything in the world is on a continuum, and I've never forgotten that. Nothing's true. Well, there are a few things that are truly binary, but for the most part, it's best to remember that things are on a continuum and they're all relative. So, Xiao-Li, really appreciate you spending time with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope our audience did too. I think we're just about at the time to wrap things up. So. I hope everyone continues to enjoy the ASU GSV conference as I am, and we'll look forward to seeing you down the road. And Xiao-Li, I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Let me just thank the audience, whoever you are sitting there. I hope I didn't waste 45 minutes of your time, but let me plug one more time for Harvard Data Science Review. It's a completely open access. We actually have something called a Diamond Open Access. And so just Google it or whatever the browser you use, you will find over 100 articles, COVID-19 special issues. Watch for the special issue coming, I think on October the 26th or 27th, I'm predicting 2020 elections. Will be very brave. That people will be putting down their actual numbers. So I hope you will enjoy this free resources for data science. Our slogan is everything data science and data science for everyone.
Thanks very much, Xiao-Li.
Thank you.